I'm Jules Duncan, Chair of the PRCA Built Environment Group, and have been for the last couple of years, and we run a series of events. And just for those of you who are here for the first time, just to explain how the groups work, there's several of them across the PRCA. They're run by members, for members, and it's all about networking, sharing experiences, learning, and having a great conversation. So this evening we wanted to get together a group of passionate communicators in the built environment and discuss really the topic of the day, which is how COVID-19 has affected the work that we all do. But critically, we do want to look forward. We've been here for a while now and we've all learnt a lot, and it's about all taking the steps that we need to recover and create great communications. So the theme of the evening, communications, the COVID-19 crisis and what comes next. And the four colleagues and friends that we've brought together from across the built environment with us on our panel tonight, and they are Max Curtis, who's Director of Communications and Public Affairs at Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing Association, Drew McNeill, Head of Public Relations at the British Property Federation, Johnny Morgan, External Communications Manager at Electricity Northwest, and Jennifer Riddell Carpenter, Director of Corporate Communications at BECG. And if I could just ask you, Max, Drew, Jonathan, Jenny, if you could just briefly introduce yourselves, what your organisations do and the role that you have.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and it's great to be with you. I had hoped to have my post-lockdown haircut in advance of this panel, but my barber could only fit me in tomorrow, such as the demand. So I've tried to use as much product as possible to hide what is a bit of a disaster, really. So my name's Max Curtis, as Jules says, Director of Comms and Public Affairs at Metropolitan Thames Valley. We are a housing association and a charitable organisation. We own and manage over 57,000 homes in London, the East Midlands, the South East and East Anglia. And our purpose, in essence, is that everyone should have a home and the chance to live well.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. So my name is Drew McNeill. I'm the Head of Public Relations at the British Property Federation, the BPF. The BPF is the conduit between government and the real estate sector. We're a membership organisation, the voice for real estate, and I'm responsible for shaping our industry's voice, effectively informing and engaging the media, government and the BPF's membership to enhance recognition of real estate as a vital and responsible business sector, to improve understanding of the sector's priorities and the legislative support it requires to enable economic and social well-being across the country, and to raise awareness of the BPF's influence on legislation for a more modern and sustainable built environment.
I'm Johnny Morgan. I'm the External Comms Manager at Electricity Northwest. So we are a regional electricity network operator operating in the Northwest, as you could have guessed. So we operate the electricity network in parts of Cheshire, all of Greater Manchester, Lancashire and Cumbria, so serving about 5 million people. If National Grid, a lot of people don't understand what we do, so if National Grid is like the motorway network of the electricity grid, we're like the A roads and B roads of the electricity grid. So we take power from National Grid and then we own all the cables and the assets to get the power to people's homes. I look after external communications, so that includes everything from sort of the website, social media, press office, public affairs and marketing activity.
Great, and I'm Jenny. I'm Director at BECG, so I work with Jules. So I head up the corporate comms nationally for BECG, and a big part of that is reputation management, campaigns and crisis as well. We work across a range of different sectors, predominantly those focused in the built environments, energy, transport, housing, development, but we work from the largest to the smallest, and it's been a really busy few weeks. We'll come on to why and how in the next few moments.
Brilliant. Thank you all for introducing yourselves, and let's get going. So just for everybody who's joined us tonight, and thank you so much for coming along and taking the time. The format of the evening is for us to explore the experience of this panel and think about the future together. There's some question areas that we'll start the conversation with, but it's really even more important that we get your questions. And there's going to be a couple of ways of us to get your views in this format. There is a question function to the right-hand side of your screen where you can, in a chat mode, write a question that you'd like to ask. And if you do that just as often as you want to and just put your name and your organisation, one of our team is going to be looking through those and picking out questions to put into the panel through the topics that we are going to discuss. So as the topic gets going, please add your supplementary questions and also any new topic areas that you really would like us to cover off. We're also going to be doing a few polls this evening. We'd like to get your opinion, so we've got the opportunity to put a few polls into the mix where you'll be asked a multiple choice question to get your snapshot opinion back on a couple of key topics as well. So when they come up, they'll come up on your screen instead of the holding slide you've got there with the names on. So please do vote away as quickly as you can, sort of ask the audience, and then we'll be able to report back on what your instant opinion is as representative of the industry that's out there. So just to kick off, and I'd just like to put it really on a day-to-day level, we're all here working in a slightly different way, and we have been for some time. You know, the world of work has changed a great deal. You know, Jack Dorsey at Twitter is saying to his team, you know, if you never come back, that's fine. It's up to you. But we're all going to make some decisions, and we're going to try and bring out the best of what we have been doing, but also go back maybe to things that were a little bit normal beforehand. So I just wanted to start off with asking you, as people who are running teams, how has this new world of work affected the job that you do? What have been the upsides, and what, if any, have been the downsides? And maybe if we start off, Johnny, with you on that, who's someone I know has got a big organisation you need to be communicating with, and a big customer base and a good sized team. Yeah,
certainly. So yeah, there's about 2,000 people who work at Electric. So that's about half of those are engineers who are out and about on the network. Half of them are office based. We're classed as key workers. Everybody in the business, so not just the operational teams. Technically, I'm a key worker as well, which is good to know that comms is recognised in that light. It's been really, really interesting. It's been a big challenge, I suppose, kind of personally and professionally. I've got 2 kids at home. I've got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, so learning to kind of manage work and homeschooling has been definitely a bit of a challenge. Some very odd hours going on in our house in terms of the rota. My wife works in PR as well, so both of us working from home has been very challenging. But actually work has been incredibly flexible. I already worked for 1 day a week at home, and actually, obviously, the vast majority of people, about half of the organisation are working from home now. It's pretty much only the directors and the operational staff and our contact centre staff who are actually in work in the office. And everything's worked pretty well, actually. I think everyone's experiencing the lockdown very differently. So my house is incredibly busy at the moment with 4 of us in it, all trying to do different things at the same time. I've got people in my team who live on their own, and they're experiencing it completely differently. So I think what it has done is helped us to have kind of more personal conversations, and it's broken down barriers, I think, between different teams and even within teams. And we've got to know each other. We're almost closer now than we were before the lockdown, which is bizarre. I haven't seen them apart from in 2D format for the last 3 months. So that's been really interesting. And I think when we get back to the office, I think things will have changed. I think there'll be a lot more flexibility. And I think that's a good thing for business. It's good to know that comms works well remotely, and that we can carry on doing what we need to do. And I think everybody's kind of appreciated that that flexibility, but also the recognition that we are key workers has helped. Working in a kind of built environment, working in an essential service, and something that we can all relate to as being important, has kind of elevated our role, I think, and elevated the role of comms as well, as a business recognised that that's the message that we wanted to get out.
Yeah, that's really good. Interesting phrase, key worker. It was reflected in the editorial by Danny Rogers in PR Week today in terms of the key worker of the importance of corporate communication at this time. And I think, Max, that's something that I know you and I have discussed in passing in terms of, before we talk maybe about the team and your team and how that's been working, that the effect of the status of comms and how comms has been perceived within the organisation over this period, and your thoughts on that.
Yes, and I think Johnny sort of summed it up neatly when he said that there's an elevated role of comms, and I love the idea of thinking of comms as key workers. By the way, that hasn't yet been something that I've introduced in our business, but I think it's a neat and a valid thing to say. I suppose my reflection on this is kind of broad, and I think the first sort of, Jules, you talked about upsides and downsides, and clearly that the backdrop, and it's almost become normalized, but I think it's still worth repeating, it's just been so desperately sad, and the human toll of this crisis has been tragic. And what's been, for an organization like mine, we are dealing with, directly with people's lives, providing care and support services, and it's some of the circumstances people and the experiences people have been through, our customers have been through, but also our colleagues have been really terrible. And it's been a very difficult period, and perhaps we'll come on to this, but I think it's taken a new form and a new style of leadership really to navigate through some of that emotion, the emotional side of the crisis. In terms of comms, I suppose my reflection would be that what is unique about this crisis, apart from it being a wicked problem, that there isn't a clear solution, but in the very solution to COVID and the very way to mitigate the effects of COVID, comms place is centre stage, because we don't yet have a vaccine. There are questions over the effectiveness and applicability of test and trace. So when it comes down to it, this is a national crisis that is reliant on good communications, on messages influencing how people up and down the country behave. And that in comms is what we do the whole time. We think about how do we get the right audience, the right message at the right time. So anyone who's not in comms, who's looking out and thinking about COVID, is daily seeing the importance of communications to affecting real change, and it shows how communications can actually save lives. Now, I think indirectly that's having a real impact on how people view the communications function within organizations. And it's much easier now for me to turn to our property desk, for example, who are in charge of sort of servicing people's homes, and say, and have a meaningful conversation about behavioral change theory and nudge, and how we might want to think about the messages that we employ to customers to encourage them to let us into their homes for essential gas safety checks, perhaps more so than it was previously. So I think it's fascinating to see, as Johnny said, the elevated role of comms during this period.
Excellent, thank you, Max. And Drew, before coming to you, just with Jenny, from a personal point of view and also from a team point of view, and has it changed the dynamics of team? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, so we are obviously different to Max and to Johnny, and certainly to Drew, because we're in an agency setting, consultancy setting. So we've got the needs, we're balancing the needs of the clients, which are often quite intense, with the needs of our teams and our business as well. So we've kind of got a very different set of challenges, and it is. We saw when on the 23rd of March that each of our pressures became bigger, became greater. I think we as BCG were in quite a lucky place that we had really good technology before we went into lockdown. We had really good use of Teams, like Microsoft Teams, before lockdown. We had really good joint working across the country. So we've got 3 offices across the country. Our resources and head ops are based in Winchester. But we've got great working, and we can all jump on Teams. We knew how to use the tech So that side of it, we were quite well armed for it. And that wasn't a huge change necessarily for us. For some people in the business, it might have been, but certainly for my team, we were quite flexible and well versed in that. I think from BCG's perspective, we also have quite a strong culture as an agency, where we work well, we collaborate well, we socialise well together. So there was already a big sense of team within BCG, and there's already a big sense of kind of collectiveness, if you like. So it meant going into lockdown that we could draw on that. Whether it's obviously harder to sustain it, but we definitely had it there to start with, and we've done things and flexed things as we've moved through the crisis to make sure that people are still engaged with the business and there's about trust with each of the team members as well, and relatively strong staff engagement. So I think from that perspective, it's been good. There's definitely been huge lessons learned and stuff that we'll take forward into the return to some form of new normality. And it'll be interesting to know which bits are good that we want to take forward and which bits are less good that we don't want to take forward. But from the client perspective, it's quite interesting actually, because I think we were ahead of the curve on some of our clients. We were adopting that technology way before them. We were ready to go on lockdown. Everyone in the company had laptops, great laptops that had for ages, and we were all set up to go, and lots of our clients didn't know how to log onto Teams, didn't know how to log onto Zoom. So it was like talking them through it for about a week about how you log onto these things, how you use the technology, and obviously the client can't access that stuff, then it's pretty impossible. Even though we're ready to go, we've got to kind of wait for their catch up for it. So there's a bit of a lag times in some areas, but now, however many weeks in, depressingly 12 weeks in, all that stuff obviously is running exceptionally smoothly, and I think on the whole it's been quite impressive to see both our internal teams and our client teams cope and excel in certain circumstances as well.
Great, thank you, Jenny. So we'll have our first poll in a minute, which will ask everybody who's online how they feel about a simple question about home working versus returning to an office. And obviously it's not as binary as that, and we're all thinking about how we do that. But Drew, just as a final thought, I mean, you obviously got a huge number of stakeholders that you talk to as the kind of organisation you are, all of your members effectively. What's your reflection on how easy it's been to talk with stakeholders, to be connected as you need to be?
Yeah, well, firstly, to touch upon the tech side of things, Jenny, I would have been one of those people that you would have had to hold by the hand and walk through how to use Zoom for a week. I'd never heard of Zoom or Microsoft Teams or GoToWebinar before lockdown, but now they're part of my day, like, you know, my coffee in the morning. I suppose while the transition to this brave new world has been a bit scary at times for some of us, maybe. For many of us now, remote working technology, I think, are enabling seriously positive change. I think certainly we as a team are becoming more productive and agile. Our communications with our members are becoming more, I suppose they're becoming broader, and we're reaching more of those members more often. And I think we're ultimately becoming more efficient with our time as well. So plenty of positives there once you can finally get someone to teach you how to use a Zoom properly. For work, I suppose, thinking about the content of my work and our members and their priorities, from my perspective, you know, this is a global health crisis, not specific to the built environment or property sector. We are one voice among millions trying to secure attention and understanding of our industry's concerns and what it is we need from the government to protect our businesses and enable us to support government's social and economic objectives. So it's vital that we have a unified voice, that we are focused and that we are targeted in what we're asking of government. Before lockdown, in any one day, I could have been having simultaneous conversations on various aspects of housing, student accommodation, planning, green-built home centres, retail, offices, logistics, etc., etc. But because of the noise, I suppose I've really had to consolidate, and our communications have had to focus on where the most pain is being felt by the sector, and our solutions then, as a result, have had to be very targeted. I can't have government reading the papers and thinking the real estate industry doesn't know what it wants, or thinking that we're fragmented. So any government support will only help a few in the industry. Government only has so much bandwidth to listen and develop solutions with us, certainly for any one business sector and in the middle of a crisis of this scale. So for me, it's all been about how to build consensus, because we're absolutely stronger together. And I've been trying to make sure our communications can support this.
Excellent. Thank you, Drew. I think it's very interesting what you say about, you know, you're finding efficiency, you're finding actually better ways of working. And I think we've all found that in terms of the accessibility we have to one another and to all sorts of stakeholders through this medium is a bit easier than fighting your way through diaries or physical meetings. And let's take that forward. And what I'd like, Dan, I'd ask Dan, who's our colleague and on the committee for the group for the PRCA, if we can launch a first poll for our guests this evening, and it's a very simple one, which is about how you would like to return to work, whether it feels back to where we were or you stay completely at home or there's some sort of hybrid. So it has to be a simple question, but I think behind it is, to Drew's point, you know, what do you think is going to actually bring out the best? What's the better world that we can be in? And we'll get that poll launched, and if everybody could have a think about that and give us, we'll come back with the results in a little while. And whilst you're voting on that, I just wanted to move on to the next topic with the panel, which is, you know, clearly we've seen big changes in demand across the world, across industry and across our sector and across communications. And, you know, the surveys we see in PR Week are telling us that there's been increased spending on crisis, corporate reputation, government relations and employee engagement work. Because of those are the responses that have been required, but there's been huge hits to more brand-led activity, maybe event sponsorship, real-world events, community consultations, brand activation. And I just wanted to ask you, as people, obviously communicators in the space with a whole variety of objectives, what have you found you've done less of? What have you done more of, and what have become the priorities for your organisation? Does that ring true for you, those kind of ups and downs that the surveys are showing us? And let's go to you, Max, on that in terms of where you've been putting your emphasis of work.
It's a really interesting question. I think throughout this period, I found that the fundamentals of communication haven't changed. There is, you know, there's still a focus on reaching the right audience with the right message at the right time. But I think it would be, I think the scale of what happened, and Jenny quoted the actual date there, I think March the 23rd, you were saying was kind of recognise the key date where people sort of, where London locked down. I think the key, and the country locked down, I think the key, the impact that had on colleagues necessitated, before anything else really, a focus on internal communication. Like Johnny, we have a similar size organisation. We have 2,000 colleagues who were spread across 6 or 7 offices. It was quite a diverse group of people, and I think there was a real need during those first few weeks to keep and ensure that people felt connected to the organisation. We established a program called MTVH Connect, which was a daily program of guest speakers, of colleague conversations, of coffee rooms, where colleagues could zoom in and feel connected. We held in total over 6 or 7 weeks about 50 sessions. And it felt very important that there was a place for colleagues to engage during that period. So I think that would be the first thing, would be internal communications. And then the second point would be in terms of the messaging and the story we're telling. Is we've always been an organisation that's very focused on the front line and on giving people a home and the chance to live well. But during this period in particular, we've really seen a focus on our frontline workers. And I think that's because the country was focused on the front line with Clap for Carers, key workers, And in our organisation, you know, we have people running accommodation services for 7 NHS trusts. So they're providing accommodation for the doctors and nurses who are on the front line. We had people who were running care services such that it wasn't really an option to run those services from a distance, and they had to carry on going into work every day. And I think in many ways what happened during that period, by focusing on that group by necessity, it was extremely healthy for our organisation, because we really put the focus on those people in the organisation who are closest to our customers. And that's right, and that's where it should be. And in many ways, this crisis has just really clarified the incredible role that people play. And as communicators, our job was really to tell their story and bring the rest of the organisation closer to what we really did and the value we really added.
Great, thank you for that. And Johnny, as Max was saying, you know, you're a similar sized organisation and you have customers maybe at a little distance because we know how your business works. But a couple of things for you. And again, you know, how did your priorities change? And comment you were making earlier in the week when we were chatting was about actually an upside of the kind of work around accessing media, for example, that in some ways this situation has shown different and potentially better ways of working in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think certainly agree with Max. The importance of internal communications has been just so important. It's something that, you know, I don't directly look after internal communications, but obviously my colleagues in the communications team do, and we've been trying to, as you would in a crisis communications situation, you've got to marry up your internal comms with your external comms and make sure that you're sharing the right messages at the right time and getting the order right, and that's been something that we've really taken from our crisis comms, and we have a very proactive approach to all of our crisis comms. This is obviously with the crises that we normally deal with, the sort of big storms and things that cause, you know, people to go off and lose power. This is something that's quite different, and we were actually concerned at one stage that we were sending out too many internal updates, but we actually did a sort of survey between colleagues, and they thought it was the sort of the right level. We must have sent about 50 or so by sort of last week, I think was the count. So starting off, we were doing daily updates, we were doing daily media wrap-ups as well as social media updates, and there was a little bit of a lag for us in the media because originally we weren't classed as key workers, sort of officially by the government. So our trade body actually took that forward, can make sure that you recognise people. And I think that really helped, and we used that message to make sure that people understood why we were still out and working. So particularly when the social distancing rules came in and everybody was working from home, our teams were still out working on the network. You know, they have to go out and fix faults when it happens. They're still digging up roads, they're still climbing up poles, and they were observing social distancing sort of where it was possible. But that sort of close engineering work sometimes requires more than one person, and we were getting some criticism around that. So we worked with the media, and as you say, we found that actually working closely with the media, we found some really good opportunities, and we found the media more receptive than we'd expected. We sort of thought you hear stories about, you know, there's no journalists around, loads of journalists have been kind of furloughed or they're working from home or they're too busy. Actually, what we found is that they've been looking for lighter stories, because the sort of, as Max said at the start, the situation is so dire, and it's so difficult for everybody. They're looking for other areas that they can explore. So we've done some really nice human interest. So in terms of how our priorities have changed, I'd say we've gone kind of over the top on human interest stories and the people behind sort of our key workers, the people who are kind of keeping the power flowing, and we've actually moved away from putting up, you know, our chief exec and you know, senior managers, and we put frontline people up for interviews. And to be honest, I've been trying to push that for a little while, and we've not really had the buy-in from the business because of a perceived risk. But actually, in this situation, it wouldn't have made sense to have, you know, a manager who's sat at home talking on behalf of people who are out there actually doing the work. So that was something that worked really well. We managed to do some good broadcast pieces, and actually we found broadcast media as well, TV in particular, I've really appreciated having somewhere to go and something to film, because I think I get the impression that there's not been that many opportunities, so that's been good. And then a final point from me, just on how priorities have changed, we are a lot more focused on public affairs, particularly at the moment, and that's because, again, internally we were at the stage where those press briefings were actually giving us the information in the evening. It's kind of the 6 o'clock press briefing from Boris Johnson, was telling us what we were then going to send out to our internal colleagues next, and how we were going to apply them. So really moved to a really agile model, a really small number of people involved in kind of signing off those comms, which is kind of what we do in crisis mode. It's worked well, actually. And that's meant that it's been kind of recognised that comms plays that vital role. I think you could see that a wider view of the fact that the government started doing daily briefings, and actually there was a bit of criticism that they started a bit too late and they should have done it for longer. There was an appetite just for more information, and as communicators, I think that's something that we need to strive to do and be proactive with that comms to all of our audiences.
Great, thank you, Johnny. So a lot of, say, complementarity with Max there is about the people on the front line, but the public affairs angle is really important. I suppose, Drew, it's a huge part of, as you said, your mission. And how have you found that your, the priorities have changed, and maybe a comment on how enacting public affairs and influencing in the last months has changed for you?
Well, so the British Property Federation has over 20 committees with maybe between 20 and 35 members sitting in each committee. We had to transition all of that to a sort of digital platform. We now do it on Zoom. That's been pretty self-explanatory though, and facilitated with ease. But we then also had to launch. So we had an events program of, let's say, 60 to 80 events a year. We've had to digitalize all of that now as well, and again we do it on Zoom. So we launched My BPF Digital Series to, I suppose, ensure that our members are still feeling connected to us, still feeling as though they're getting value for money from their membership. I think to echo what Johnny and Max are saying, I think there's a point here around connectedness, how connected you feel, and I think that's been at the heart of the transition for us, becoming more digital, just ensuring that everyone, including members but other stakeholders, the media, the government, feel connected to us. On government specifically, it's been quite an interesting ride over the past few months. When lockdown first came into effect, we immediately published on behalf of our members our sector's commitment to support its customers who, through no fault of their own, but due to coronavirus, are concerned about how they're going to pay rent. From us, this is a serious statement of intent, underpinned by the importance we put on partnership. Commercial property owners and their tenants are economic partners. Government understood that position, but something was going on behind the scenes that made government feel that they needed to give the most hard-pressed businesses more reassurance. So they introduced a ban on evictions, so that they called it a moratorium. I suppose most of our members felt that where businesses felt that they couldn't pay rent, and they felt fearful that then that was absolutely needed to ensure that they could get through the next few months. But the issue arose when some of our sector's customers chose to misinterpret that policy and abuse it, use it as a tool to stop talking to their landlords and to refuse to pay any rent regardless of their business's financial circumstances. So this was really disappointing, obviously not in the spirit of partnership and not what government intended. We had to then convince government to explain, and they eventually did, through a statement from Alok Sharma, the business secretary, that the eviction on bans is not a rental holiday. You've absolutely got to still speak to your landlord because rent owed during this period is still going to be owed. So we had to instigate a bit of a campaign around, if you can pay your rent, you should be paying your rent, because if you are a global, conglomerate with lots of liquidity, lots of cash, and if you are not paying your rent, you're actually undermining landlords' ability to support businesses who are genuinely in distress and need that support. And furthermore, you are putting investment into our town centres at risk. So if landlords are pension funds, they are long-term institutional investors, and they invest billions of pounds into our town centres across the UK. And if they don't feel like they can trust the UK legal system, that they aren't going to get their returns from that investment, you are seriously putting that investment at risk for our town centres.
Incredibly busy time, Drew, isn't it? And so many different forces at play within the government agenda at the moment. And just to finish off with Jenny on this one, I know Jenny's got some insights on how talking to media and stakeholders has been different, and we're going to ask a poll on that. But just before we go to Jenny, just wanted to let you know what happened on the last poll, where we asked the question, how would you prefer to work going forward? And we had the option of go back to the office, a hybrid solution, or continue working from home. And there's been an absolute landslide. We had 4% continue to work from home, 4% go back to the office, and as you can see there, 92% hybrid. So I think very much echoing what you've been saying, to try and find the best of the world we've been pushed into, and unexpectedly have found some good things about it, and we would like to maintain some of that flexibility. We'll put up another poll in a minute about media and how you as an audience and our guests tonight feel media relations and media handling has been in the crisis. But Jenny, just on that, the priorities of work that you've seen and how work has been aided or not by being in lockdown.
So I think that I completely agree with particular points that Max and Johnny made. So on Max's point, the fundamentals for us as well just haven't really changed. The fundamentals of what we're trying to achieve have absolutely stayed strong during the storm. And talking kind of beyond the work that I do, so a lot of these big planning comms development within BECG. Sorry, I can't talk. And our planning comms team have moved from doing physical exhibitions, doing events online and virtual platforms. So they've been able to do the same task, the same objective, deliver the same client need, but deliver entirely by a different platform that meet the same client demands. In corporate PR, it's been a similar story to a certain extent. So we work on corporate accounts, reputation management. All of that becomes redundant during a global crisis of this nature. And a lot of our work then comes to COVID PR response, flexing our skills, flexing what we're doing to help out clients' real on the ground issues, including getting good PR coverage where they're doing great things, where they're supporting their community, but also sometimes actually just helping them out on internal staff comms, internal engagement, and just lending a hand at kind of crisis staff and flexing depending on where we can be best used. But for me, one of the biggest focus for a huge amount of work that I've been doing is helping clients really refocus their work over the past few months and giving them the right insights to provide the right leadership to the global crisis. And it feels like I seem to be collecting every task force under the sun and sitting on every task force under the sun within that, and including setting them up on behalf of clients as well. I think I sit on 2 with Drew. And Max is indirectly linked to one of the ones that I sit on the PRCUA's crisis COVID one. So it seems to be that is a huge amount of our work from the 23rd of March, was just getting involved, providing a lot of leadership and insights, and helping coordinate the sector response, but also feeding back to our clients as well about what was happening out there and what we were doing and what we were seeking to do. One of the biggest successes for us in the past few months has been a huge campaign around unemployment. And I really echo Johnny's point that some of our media work has been actually far easier to land media coverage over the past 12 weeks, because we've been giving them what they want to hear to a certain extent, providing the leadership, providing the results, but also that the journalists are looking for really quick responses. They're looking for really quick outcomes and big stories to report on. And obviously the situation at the peak of the crisis was changing daily, changing every 24 hours, and just being able to give leadership, give response, give content, give comment was exactly what the journalists were looking out for. So we set up, one of our clients' communities at work, we set up a national task force for them, put them off as chair, worked with government to just coordinate all the organisations that had a focus on tackling unemployment across the country. And we as BCG set up that leadership, provided a lot of focus of what that should be doing, what that remit was, worked with all the task force members to help coordinate what that response could look like, what our asks of government were, what we needed to help really solve the unemployment challenge. That this is pre the first set of unemployment figures, when we knew the unemployment figures were going to be quite drastic. And within the space of 4 weeks, really, we'd started that campaign, got coverage in Sunday Times, got a response from Boris Johnson, and yesterday in the mini budget got financial commitment to tackle youth unemployment, double the number of DWP operatives providing employment support, and create and sustain job creation through the green economy, which were our three only asks of government. So from that perspective, it's great to be in comms, because you get to provide the leadership, provide the insight, provide the solution, and then see a campaign in the course of 4 to 5 weeks run its course. And I suspect that we'll probably find over the course of the next 12 weeks or the next 12 months, there'll be many elements of those that repeat in different cycles. That if we go through a second wave, if we find that the economic crisis takes different guise, if we see different challenges come out, being able to respond quickly, identify the problem quickly, identify the solution quickly, and then put all the pieces, the media, the political stakeholders, use all your tools in the box quickly to develop a campaign that doesn't need too much resource, but just needs minds put together. So I think for us, that was really where we've seen it in the corporate comms and crisis, a lot of our work shift to kind of that high level leadership and problem solving.
Yeah, and it's all part of that enhancement, isn't it? And enhancing comms, that Johnny used that phrase, and so elevating comms and the speed of work. And I've got a question from the floor here, so thank you very much indeed. I can't see who asked it, but this is a question to you all, just to finish off this section, which is from one of our audience tonight. What aspects of your organization's pandemic response, or the response strategies you've implemented for clients, do you think you'll carry over once we are back in a post-COVID world? And who knows when that could be. But I suppose if you think of something which isn't completely dominated by where we are post-COVID, quick one-liner from any of you who'd like to chime in on that.
Yeah, I'll respond to that quickly. So I think from our point of view, we've got quite detailed crisis comms plans anyway, and that's something that, borrowing my own phrase again, elevates comms every time we have a storm, because people recognise just how important that is. But we've recognised that we can do that during a longer incident as well. So that's worked well. So it's more sort of confirming the plans that we had, but knowing that that works in other situations as well. And also just making sure that we can kind of continue speaking with the business, the right people in the business, to get really, really quick answers. That's been something that's been really important. And finally, like Drew said, moving to kind of virtual events and those sorts of things, I think less of a kind of a crisis response sort of thing, but something that I think will be a lesson that we take out of this, that you don't need to be face to face for every single meeting.
Great, yeah.
I think from us, I think two areas. One would be service improvement, and the other on an organisational level, and the other would be organisational development. So what's been brilliant during this period is to see so many examples of innovation in the service that we provide, and new ways of doing things. For example, in our development side, and the amazing virtual viewings, which were really harnessing technology to allow people, to allow the property market to continue at a time where people couldn't do physical viewings. And I think the work that, I know our organisation wasn't unique, but the work that our team did on that to ensure that people still were reserving properties at a time when they couldn't physically see them. That takes an enormous amount of effort and technology, and I think it'd be great to see service improvement also on the repair side and maintenance. You know, you don't always need, or it's not always desirable to have to visit someone's home. You can potentially do a tech solution first, at least to triage the issue. And then on organizational development, I think, you know, some of the other speakers talked about agile working, greater use of technology, as Johnny spoke, cultural change. I think there is a real opportunity, and I think a lot of organizations have been very self-reflective during this time to really think about the culture of the organization and the importance of purpose, and really clarifying what the purpose of the organization is. And I think those things will carry over. Jules, I don't want to make your life chairing any more difficult, but I just wanted to make 2 more points, if I may.
Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, it was just to say congratulations to Jenny on the Jobs Guarantee campaign, because you know, our chief executive, we were all really, you know, we really felt the need. It was a space to operate in, and I suppose my reflection on that campaign and the success of it was linked back to sort of Drew's point about government relations, and I suppose it links to carrying over as well, which is, I think, the key to government relations at the moment, and key to gain traction with the government will be to be part of the solution and to offer ideas for the recovery. And that's perhaps why one of the reasons the Jobs Guarantee, as well as its amazing execution, it also was fundamentally based on, well, that we can be part of the solution, and this is how we can get the economy to recover, and that's possibly why it got traction. So that was point number 1. And then the second point, just on the first poll, I thought it was really interesting that only 4% of people listening would vote for the status quo as it is now. I'm assuming that the majority of people tuning in today are working from home. And I think it would be really interesting, and I don't know if there's a chat facility, or I'd be really interested to hear why that is, because my experience in my team is it's very mixed. Some people have really enjoyed working from home, but there is an undercurrent, particularly of people who are new to organizations, and who, you know, have found it quite difficult to build relationships during this time as they perhaps would in an office. And I think that's a concern, actually. And I'm guessing what the reason is, but the 4% supportive of the status quo suggests the office is providing something. And I think a lot of organizations are thinking about and rethinking what the office means and is. And it'd be really helpful to hear a bit about what's beneath that, if that's possible.
Yeah, well, thank you, Max. And no, it's always a pleasure chairing this panel. And the use the questions function, everybody, to Max's question there, you know, what is driving that sense that we would like something that is not exactly as it was, but certainly isn't, you know, assuming mostly working from home at the moment. So we need to crack on. So Jenny, Drew, if you've got any sort of really burning points on what we will carry forward, please fire away. Otherwise,
mine's a quick one that I've always been concerned with. In the last few weeks, everyone's been asking this question, and it's similar to the new joiners, but it's actually about the new graduates, the new people that are young, that haven't worked before, that are straight out of uni or straight out of school. A big part of comms you learn on the job. A big part of comms you don't learn in books, and you learn through osmosis by working with people around you. And how would we sustain skills development early for younger people starting out in their careers if we would predominantly remote working? We wouldn't be able to in the same way. And I know that I learned a lot of my skills from learning off more experienced people and being physically next to them. So I think, yeah, it's just something that was kind of, it plays on my mind for not now, because we haven't got any turnover at the moment in our team. But if we were going to recruit graduates, we would have to completely flex and change how we skill them up.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. Righty-ho. Drew, anything on what you would take forward? Any changes that you'd like to see?
Two quick things. First thing is the digital communications with our members and digital webinars. Johnny, you mentioned it earlier, but absolutely in some hybrid way when we get back to being able to do events with our members, for example. I think we were wanting to continue to capture the effectiveness of digital programs, because where a face-to-face policy seminar might have brought 50 people, at the moment with a digital webinar we can bring 100 people together, and so that's been really good. The second thing is perception. I think landlords' perception has taken quite a beating in the media over the past few months. I think we have had big wins though, especially in government, around what does a landlord, who is a landlord, what does landlord mean? And it's, you know, it's our pension funds, it's, you know, 45 million people across the UK invested in some way with their savings or pensions in commercial property. I think that that message and how we ensure we work with government moving forward to enable and to protect that sort of investment, why it's important, will be at the top of our agenda, I'm sure, for years to come.
Great, thank you, Drew, and thank you everybody for that. Very, very interesting insights. If we could just roll our second poll out. This is quite specific on that point about have other people found access to media in particular, something that's changed and been a different experience. We'd like you to answer this very simple poll on that, and then we'll get your thoughts on that and see how they chime. And I think jumping on from where we were just there from the last points about the challenges for a new generation of people coming into comms, and also the challenges of the skills that we've needed in the response to COVID. I would be interested to get from the panel start a conversation, and please again do chime in with questions, because this is an area that's really important for everyone as we're looking to the future of our skills. Taking into account the skills that have been most important for a comms team member to have in this COVID period, are any reflections on the skills that you'd like to see more of from anyone that you hire, and any particular gaps that were identified because you had to respond quickly to the situation? Drew, let's go to you on that one. Is there a sense there of people you're working with, or indeed your own work, in terms of where you found you had to adapt quickly and what you'd look to develop in the future?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to this digital point again, trying to establish a sort of refreshed and innovative visual identity for the brand online. Yeah, we had Twitter, yeah, we had LinkedIn, etc. We were using those. We did have e-newsletters going into inboxes and things like that, but actually when you're faced with everyone working from home all the time, that's not quite enough. So we're actually in the process of doing a new BPF website at the moment, and that's soon going to launch. So I think moving forward, ensuring that we have the skills to in-house to keep driving momentum behind that will be vital.
Great, thank you. So same question across. Johnny, what's your thinking on that?
I think rather than kind of, I definitely agree, kind of digital platforms and things like that. But I think probably for me, it's more about personal development and the kind of the way that our teams are kind of carrying themselves in communications. I think when you're all together in a team, what I've found is it can be quite easy for people to kind of fire you a quick question rather than think about things for themselves. And I always try and encourage my teams to think, you know, what would you do if I wasn't here? What would you do if, you know, you couldn't get hold of a manager? You know, how would you take this forward? And that certainly in this situation has kind of brought that to the fore. I think people are really having to step up to the mark, and they have done. Certainly with the different kind of working hours and things, people are in some ways more available, sort of in the evenings and things like that. In some ways less available, because if I'm off kind of dealing with the kids and trying to learn about the Great Fire of London, which was today's treat, then you know, I'm not going to be answering emails at the same time. If somebody rings me, then I might deal with that. But actually having people's kind of independence and taking a bit more initiative and coming up with the sort of solutions themselves has been massively valuable to me as a manager. And I think probably I've been told off for saying, I remember being at a session, I got told off for saying soft skills. It should be smart skills, I'm told. So smart skills are just kind of like, actually what we do as communicators, the importance of being able to talk to people in the right way. You know, it's a bit harder actually on online sometimes. And for the people in my team who are maybe a little bit quieter, actually even sticking your video on a video call has been a big step for some of them. But it's a conversation that we had and said, you know, it's a way of kind of building trust with people, and as communicators we have to build trust, and it's actually helped some of those conversations, and I've definitely seen more of those skills come out, which I'd be really looking for people to take forward.
Great, Johnny, that's very interesting. And Max, I'll come to you next, but you asked for feedback, Max, and we've got a good comment here I'll share with you because it is relevant to this section as well. And you got Lucy Mercer saying, I was at my agency only for 1 month before going into lockdown, which is obviously somebody really at the start of their career, and never liked the idea of remote working. However, my perception has completely changed and I found myself able to adapt accordingly. It's the idea of being almost forced into a situation which makes you adapt to it. But I found myself being incredibly productive as a result, and would now welcome the idea of a remote working a couple of days per week. So the sort of classic hybrid split. So an interesting insight there in terms of how somebody has found it on the ground. And I suppose for you, Max, what skills have come to the fore? Which of your team have thrived, and where have you seen some gaps you might want to develop? Any thoughts on it?
Firstly, the comment you read out is an interesting one, because I think it shows an adaptability to the situation, and I think that's, although COVID has often felt like it's being done to us and we're not in control, I think it's amazing people's adaptability to situations, and that's demonstrated by colleagues have done that here and in that comment. I think I'd go along a similar line, Johnny, really, whether you call it soft skills, smart skills, or leadership skills. I do think that there has been a new way of leading, and I don't think that's just the traditional top-down leadership. In fact, things are harder to control. This problem is harder to control when we're all working remotely. Traditional command and control and hierarchical structures totally fall away. I mean, on a Zoom call, we're all the same size box after all. And I think that what I'm really prizing at the moment are skills like empathy, listening, patience as well. I mean, you know, Johnny talks about having to teach his kids about the Fire of London. You know, I think we need at this time, particularly with all the tech glitches. I mean, this has been glitch free so far, but you know, the number of calls that don't quite go that well, right? You do need patience at this time, and I think that those kind of skills have come to the fore, and I think actually it's reflected in the kind of leaders in society who have done really well out of this crisis. So, you know, I know people have different opinions, but I think there's general acceptance. I think about the kind of people, it's not really the command and control leaders, it's people like Jacinda Ardern, Rishi Sunak. You will not face this alone. You know, very early on, that statement really resonated. People like Captain Tom, Joe Wicks. You think about the kind of people and the kind of leadership that's been exhibited during this period, and I'm sure in our own organisations we would all recognise and see examples of perhaps more affiliative, empathetic leadership really coming to the fore. And I think that's a very exciting opportunity, but I think the key message is leadership is not just done with by people who have got leader in their title, and it's something that we can all exhibit and display.
Great, thank you. Jenny?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with all that. I think it's, my team, I think, are watching, so I've got to be careful what I say. But I think what's great to see from our team is that we had a huge amount of trust in our team before we went into lockdown. So there was a huge amount of trust all in any way. So me trusting them, and then trusting me, and then trusting each other as well. And I don't think that we could have done half as well as we did without that level of trust. So looking at future recruits and people that we bring into the team in future, distilling and just understanding how we get that trust. And part of that is culture, part of that is building a trusting environment, but part of that is the people themselves as well. having people that care about the job they're doing, care about each other, care about, like Max is saying, just have a huge sense of empathy. But if I believe that you believe in the job you're doing, you're obviously going to be much more capable of being left alone to do that job. And if you believe that I believe in you, you're more likely to want to bring me in at the right moment. We can't physically look over people's shoulders anymore. We can't physically see what's going on. So we have to be doing this blind to a certain extent. And it just, for me, comes back to that trust point at all. And yeah, leadership is a huge part of that, but not leadership necessarily from the top, but just listening. And a huge sense of equality, actually, that we are, from our most junior staff member to our most senior staff member, everybody has always got something to say and they know they'll be heard. And it doesn't matter how small or big the problem is, that they feel their voice is heard as well. And I think that in a world where mental health has been taken more seriously than ever has before, giving people the confidence to be able to speak up and air and be able to share comments, share content is particularly important as well.
Yeah, that's really, really, really interesting insights, and I think hopefully useful to give an overview of for everyone listening in as to where strengths have been really appreciated, and those strengths are going to be sought and looked for in team members in the future. We'll move on to our last question in a minute, so we can wrap this up not too long before 6:15, because we want to keep things relatively short in this virtual format. It's wonderful, but I think needs to be a little bit quicker than we might do normally. Just before we move on to a last question, we had the poll: has it been easier to connect with media during lockdown? Thank you for everyone who voted in on this. It was 54% of everyone who's online, and the answer is 71% are saying yes, 21% no change, and 7% saying a little harder, so no, not easier. And so kind of an endorsement there for something that may have been unexpected at the beginning of this, that actually you had an attentive and somewhat available media looking for the story. And if you can offer some of those solutions and new stories that Max was talking about in the government relations context, in these contexts as well, we're having success. So we'll just move on to a last question area. And I think one thing that I've certainly been observing, and one thing that we work on a lot ourselves, is that expansion of corporate narrative, and how this whole experience and intensive it's been has affected a story and a purposeful story that an organization may wish to talk about. The expression ESG, focusing on environmental, societal and governance agendas within organizations, it's classically been used in investment decisions by ethical investors, is now coming to the fore in a lot of thinking for corporates and how they tell their story. We've had COVID, we've had the sharp light shone on ethics by Black Lives Matter, and we've had the Facebook ad scandal. The calls for a green recovery are extremely loud, and the sustainability agenda for corporates is going to be as important as it has remained as important. So lots of forces. And just to finish on a big point, what are your reflections on that? Has your strategy evolved already, and how may you see the way you tell your corporate narrative evolving in light of what we've all been through? Drew, let me start with you in terms of insights that you may have, and potentially for your members as much as for the BPF itself.
Yeah, so let me start with diversity and inclusion. So ensuring a more diverse representation in the industry's senior leadership was at the top of our agenda before this crisis and before Black Lives Matter movement kicked off. Of course, it still is now during this crisis, and in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, and no doubt it will continue to be. Absolutely, it's shone a light on it, and I think it's fueled a bit of a fire under the industry to instigate more change, better change, quicker. Those businesses who are already taking this seriously as an agenda item for the sector, I believe will absolutely be better able to respond to the diversity of issues that the crisis, the pandemic has created. And this crisis will only fuel public sentiment. The business must be a force for good. And as opposed to just simply making profits. And I suppose I should add that, last year the British Property Federation launched its Redefining Real Estate campaign with two objectives in mind: to increase the positive impact that real estate delivers for local communities, society, the environment, and the second objective really was to improve trust in the industry by ensuring that the economic and social value that we create is better recognised by the industry's stakeholders. Now, I want to say this sensitively because I don't like talking about opportunity when, as Max rightly noted at the very beginning of this webinar, the context is really sad. Lots of people have died and have been seriously ill. And however, if we're really serious about becoming a business sector that's much more than just making profits, the next few months will be an opportunity for us. The next few months will define us as a business sector for decades to come. The Land Aid, the property industry's charity, launched its emergency £1 million COVID fund for youth homelessness. Properties are being given to the NHS frontline workers. Nightingale hospitals popped up overnight. Members are donating laptops to school kids who can't get into school, etc., etc. We will need to reflect on all of this when the dust settles, to ensure much better understanding of who we are and what we're all about as a business sector. We'll need to capture all of that. So I suppose in conclusion, diversity and inclusion has always been critical, and if you weren't taking it seriously, you will already be behind, and you will struggle with stepping up and facing the challenges that this sort of crisis and other crises pose to you in your business. So get on with it and make a difference and be better at it. And I suppose secondly, it is that we absolutely must ensure that we can better reflect society and communicate how we're going to maximize that contribution.
Great, thank you, Drew. That's excellent. And Johnny, over to you. You're a fundamental part of the infrastructure of a community. You're the reason people can turn on a light or get onto their important Wi-Fi at the moment for the way we all live. And you're an important part of society and community. What's your thinking? How you might be affected by this? The way you go about telling your story.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, and I think to start with, there was a media story around will the grid cope with everybody working at home? Everybody's going to be at home, so is everything just going to fall over, and is there going to be loads of power cuts, and what's going to happen? And actually, the opposite was true, because it's actually industry and business that makes up something like 2/3 of the energy that's used, certainly in the northwest. So we actually found a drop in electricity, but what we found at the same time, while that's kind of like a practical function of what was happening, the communications around that and the emotion around that was very, very different. So if you're an employee and you go to work and work has a power cut, great, you get to go home. if you're working from home and you have a power cut and nobody else in your business does because they're all in different locations, you feel more stranded, or you're in quite a difficult position. So we found that our fundamental keeping the power flowing became even more important, and actually getting that message out to say, we're here for you, we're kind of doing this, this is what we are all about. It kind of really refocused us on kind of customer service, if you like, and kind of the fact that we see this happening in my other example of storms as a crisis. Our proactive approach to that has been developed kind of over the last few years, really, probably 4 or 5 years, when we had a couple of really, really big incidents, and we just weren't quick enough, in that kind of golden hour to say kind of what's going on right now, but B, just kind of keeping those updates going. So even if there's nothing really to say, keep making sure you've got updates going out so people can see that you're actively working, so that if there is a power cut, if there is a problem, you've got photos of people on site who are actually there fixing it. So getting close to people and understanding their kind of personal lives a little bit more and some of their stresses, and understanding and having that empathy, which was mentioned earlier on, as a business, and getting that into your communications has been massively important. Second quick point is for us, which may apply to others sort of on this call as well, talking about sort of infrastructure is around that green recovery and the net zero. And I think there was something that we were starting to push as the electricity network. We're expecting something like a doubling of electricity use at peak times by 2038, which is kind of Greater Manchester's target for net zero. And that's because of electric vehicles. So the government have got a consultation out at the moment about whether they should change when you can last buy a sort of a petrol or diesel or hybrid car. But that's gonna make a massive difference to our network. So there's a bit of momentum building up, and Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, has been quite vocal on all of this as well. We were a little bit worried that was going to stifle the debate, that the pandemic's going to cause problems with that, and we're going to lose momentum. And actually, what we've seen, it probably it caused a bit of a delay, maybe for, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks, maybe, kind of first part of the lockdown, when there were other priorities, and now we've seen it come back even stronger. Government and the Labour Party have done consultations recently on the green recovery and what it means and how do we do it. And it's not just about the economic recovery, but making sure it's sustainable. So again, as part of our public affairs work, it's something we're sticking really close to and making sure that we can make the most of that. And as Drew said, make sure that's kind of a long-lasting contribution to society and through our communications.
Very, very interesting. So you're taking that longer term view and, as I say, making that contribution on the sustainability side of things. And Max, coming to you, obviously, as your world, a very purposeful mission in any case. So have you reflected on how that may be changed, or you continue on a similar tack when you're coming to telling your why as MTVH?
I think this is a really good question to end on, and I think in many ways gets to the heart of what good communications is about. It is about connecting what we do in our organisations to our purpose and recognising that purpose is really important. And Jules, in your question, you kind of reeled off Black Lives Matter, climate change, green recovery. And the striking thing is that certainly the organisations on this panel, and no doubt the organisations, everyone who's taking part in this seminar today, we all touch upon these really critical issues. And I think recognising that and recognising the role of communications to connect us to that purpose is absolutely critical. From my organisation's perspective, Metropolitan Thames Valley, we have a very unique Windrush story. Metropolitan was founded in the really in sort of the middle of the 20th century by a lady called Molly Huggins, who was essentially a philanthropist who saw post-war Britain and the challenges, both economic and societally, and racial injustice that abounded for Windrush migrants who'd come to this country to start a new life. And her basic thought was that we need to provide good housing if people are going to get on and be able to make their contribution to society. And it's an incredibly powerful story. When the news of George Floyd's murder became global, I mean, on a very personal level, I found it incredibly sad. Not only the incident itself, not only the fact that the incident was one of sort of of many historically, but also my other reflection was just how far that society has to go really to repair itself. Wearing a communications hat as communications director of our organisation, I think there's sort of 3 areas really that communications needs to be part of the solution. And we don't know all the answers to these problems, and I would only ever say part of the solution. but one of them is by listening and asking questions. This issue and all the issues you talk about are hugely complex, and I think it's really, I think as a communications team, everyone says communications is about communicating, but it's also much more about listening and really understanding the issues at play. I think externally, for my organisation, it's been and continues to be and will be making clear that as an organisation, we are an organisation that stands firm against racial injustice. And then I think internally, you know, we have a real job to make it clear, abundantly clear to our colleagues that we are an organisation who welcomes all our colleagues and where everyone has the opportunity to get on and do well. So kind of in conclusion, these are big problems. The solutions are not known, they're not easy, and they don't just sit with communications. But I firmly believe that communications has a role, and that is why we are in such a dynamic and exciting industry. But it's an industry with purpose, and we do important work, and that's been clarified during this period.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, I think that's a very good point you make there, that, you know, comms is critical to connect that purpose to everybody else. Once you, assuming you get your purpose right at the outset, and I think you've got purposeful organisations here. And Jenny, maybe just to finish with you, you know, where you're advising people in terms of how they find purpose if they maybe haven't really thought about that so much as an organisation before, and what trends you're seeing or expecting.
Yeah, so I think there are three main things we've taken from this experience, and three main things we're going to be advising clients on if we aren't already doing so. The first one is that you can never be too prepared for a crisis. So we obviously do a lot of crisis work within BCG, and a lot of people that we work with always say to us they never imagined this could have happened to them, that this level of crisis could happen to their organisation. And you hear it countless times. And we smile and nod as consultants and say, no, of course, it's very unexpected, but it happens and it can happen. And as communication professional, a crisis of any scale will happen at least twice in your career. And now we've all got a great leveler in this crisis, and we've all been affected by it. And there are so many organisations that just didn't have crisis continuity plans in place, didn't have, hadn't ever considered that something could happen to them. So they had no expectation that it could. And this has been a great reminder that you can never be too prepared. Secondly, I think the global nature, the way ideas catch and the way that things happen across the world has changed significantly. The nature of this being a global crisis, but also it shows that how trends operate and how people are influenced. George Floyd's murder shows that something that happens in one state in America can spark conversations and actions here in the UK, just as a young girl from Sweden really shaped our environmental and industrial policy in the UK and beyond. So something that happens in a different country or in a different state or a different area that you've never visited absolutely can shape your day-to-day life and the work of your organisation and your economy as well, more nationally, but it can certainly affect society and create unrest and demands for action is number two. And thirdly, and I think that's the most important thing for my clients, and finally, people are more critical than ever. Joe Public is more critical than he's ever been before. People assume that organisations are rich organisations and that they're greedy organisations. And we saw that play out with furlough. We saw that play out in the national furlough debate, that the big organisations that furloughed staff were accused by Joe Public as being rich, wealthy, greedy, run by billionaires who had far too much money, and they should have remortgaged their own homes before they put people on furlough. People are neither right nor wrong to make those arguments, but the point is they obviously don't understand how organisations are run. They don't understand the values of these organisations and what they're doing. They certainly don't understand how furlough works in practice. And it's not necessarily their point to, but it's your point as an organisation to cut through that noise, demonstrate that you're values-led, demonstrate that you're not just, that you're for purpose, not for profit. Whatever you do, you've got a purpose. Even if you're for profit and shareholder driven, you've got a purpose. You've got to communicate that. You've got to cut through the noise. And if you don't, you're going to get brought down at some point. You will not be able to survive the future in 10, 20, 50 years time. And the companies that get that and respond to that, whether that's environmental, whether it's political, whether it's social, economic, whatever it is, companies have to be able to show that they're values driven and they can adapt, and they can manage how they communicate with people to get that message across.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Very good sum up, Jenny. Indeed, thank you for that. And I think we've ended on some fascinating points there and a really excellent discussion. Just we'll wrap things up now and head to our virtual bar and go and do some networking. The conversation has been really varied, and I've found it incredibly valuable, and I hope everybody else has who's come along and joined us tonight. You know, we started talking with Johnny about the elevation of comms, and we've explored that topic really in quite some depth, and the positives, as Drew was mentioning, this, you know, it is fundamentally has been better in many ways to work in the way that we've discovered, and that's going to lead us to hopefully a hybrid and more productive way of working in the future. And we all know that the UK's productivity needs to lift up. I think insights and interest in what we'll take forward, Johnny, your reflection that really crisis all the time is something that is a kind of mindset that you're in, and Max, the skills around empathy, leadership everywhere, and your reflections on purpose going forward, amongst many other insights from Jenny's perspective on what's happened with campaigning and the opportunities for fast and effective campaigns. All great stuff. We'll be putting out some more comms around it ourselves and wrapping up the event as you'd expect. So you can see some highlights in a blog, and this will be appearing on the PRCA's YouTube channel, where I'm sure it will quickly go to the very top of the viewing charts. And it just leaves me to say a huge thank you for giving up your time. It's been really nice to have a chat actually with all of you, some of whom I know well, and some we've only just met, but you've all been excellent. Thanks indeed to Drew, to Johnny, to Max, Jenny. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, and have a very good evening. Thanks a lot.